Hi, I'm Clarissa Welsh. I'm currently an 8th grade special education teacher at Robert Blue Middle School in Eagle Grove, Iowa, and I'm also a graduate student at Morningside University. I have been researching the lack of parent participation in special education transition planning and strategies to support collaboration. An IEP is an individualized education plan that is set up for students with disabilities. One element of the IEP is a thought-out transition plan for students over the age of 14. The transition plan encompasses post-secondary expectations for living, working, learning, and all of the necessary support that's required to make those post-secondary goals achievable. The transition plan is important because students identified parent involvement in their transition planning with their quality of life and continued post-secondary education. They also reported that students whose parents were involved in the post-secondary planning were 6 times more likely to express happiness in their life after high school. In my research, I also uncovered that teachers reported that they had an increase of positive perspectives on their transition planning process when parents were active participants in the process. The problem is that there is a specific lack of parent participation throughout that transition planning process. I chose this topic because as a special education teacher, it's important to the students in 8th grade as they are just beginning that process. I happen to have a child myself who happens to have an IEP and is just beginning to be a transition age. So it's at this initial starting in the planning of throughout this process. I personally noticed a lack of parent participation within my own building, and that was also noted by other members of the IEP team sharing their concerns with me as well regarding that parent participation in that process. Through my research, I uncovered main barriers specific to parents. Barriers that were uncovered hinder that positive partnership that's needed to really create an effective transition plan for students. Parents reported commonly feeling like they were uninformed and unprepared due to the lack of available information when they were planning for the process, and that happens at an IEP meeting. Parents also indicated that they often had a language barrier and those materials were not always available in the language that they needed them. Oftentimes, parents reported that that wasn't taken into consideration, and so it made it very challenging for them to understand the process. Parents reported, as well as the previous barriers, to having a feeling of their input not being considered as important or valued during the planning sessions. Parents also shared that they had an inability to communicate as a team due to that feeling of their input not being valued. Parents statistically reported an extreme lack of invitation to come into the school building. So that could include emails, it could include phone calls, and it could also include invitations that were sent out to come into the building to learn about that transition plan, as well as a lack of invitation to come be active participants in the building. Parents reported a lack of contact from the school to home. So that included, directly into the next piece of information that I found, is a lack of parent informational materials and that communication before that transition meeting occurs. All of those things, the invitation, the information, and the contact should happen prior to an IEP meeting, and all of that can be encompassed under one umbrella that we will discuss later in the presentation. Not only did I uncover barriers that affect parents, but I uncovered barriers that affect teachers. Teachers reported a lack of preparedness for that transition planning process. It was uncovered that there is a poor professional development practices that are not set up and in place for teachers and administrators to receive that professional development they need to understand. So, due to that, teachers reported a lack of understanding in the usage of the transition supports that are already set up in their building. So, There could be transition opportunities and supports that could be available to offer and to write into a transition plan, but many teachers and administrators are unaware that they are even available. So having those learning opportunities, professional development opportunities is something that is very much lacking. Teachers also uncovered communication and that all of the process that is needed and all the elements that are needed in a transition plan that we talked about for working, for learning, for living, they are unaware of that. And the research uncovered that lack of professional development then leads into that lack of feeling prepared, and that reduces their participation. So when we find all of these barriers, all of the challenges, we need to consider then what are the strategies to improve that collaboration. There were main categories that were uncovered through my research: academic programming, building procedures, social collaboration, and the involvement of parents throughout that process. There are also strategies that fall under the categories that were identified that encompass orientations, parent open houses, guided transition academic courses available for students and parents, as well as an increase in communication regarding the transition as a whole. Due to the number of people that are involved in writing a functional transition plan within the IEP, it's very important to apply these strategies to all of the stakeholders, all the members of the IEP team. Strategies that were also uncovered in my research include interagency collaboration. So as previously discussed, all of the stakeholders need to be involved. So that's going to include all of those members of the team that would be parents, it would be educators, it would be outside agencies when appropriate, as well as administrators. That all of the people that will be part of the student's life throughout their educational experience to support them in making their post-secondary goals achievable. So there was a connection directly between communication and the participation between all of the members of that team regarding the post-secondary outcomes. There was also another thing that was uncovered is that information must be viewed from a parent's perspective. So any information that's provided needs to be provided in a way that is considered from the parent's perspective so they have better connections and they have a better understanding as to the information that's been provided to them. Additional strategies that were uncovered in my research include strategies specifically identified by parents. They recommended that the transition process start earlier, that they maintain high expectations for their student. They permit choice and risk throughout their secondary education to prepare them for those post-secondary goals. That the team recognized their family as interdependence as well as their involvement, and to prioritize parent skill development and support, to maximize technology, as well as to promote inclusion. What was interesting is there was some very clear consistencies from what parents identified to what students identified as strategies. Students also identified their student choice and parent collaboration as important. They also noted that they would like that transition planning to start earlier, that feeling of being prepared ahead of time, knowing what is coming and what to expect. Students also agreed that they would like that feeling of inclusion, to have the same opportunity as their peers. They would like to also have that family support and skill development so their parents feel more involved and their parents understand that process. And they would also like to have that collaboration between stakeholders. All of these findings were very consistent across a lot of my resources. It was very consistent through a variety of different research studies as important. So a lot of the strategies that were uncovered can all fall under one specific category of communication. Within communication can be parent support. So communication can include language barriers, meeting invitations, any parent contact, parent informational materials regarding that transition planning. They all overlap and they can fall under that big umbrella of communication. What was found in my research as well is that there is a gap in research specifically analyzing the strategies aiming to increase that parent participation. Research needs to be done to evaluate the effectiveness of each strategy that was identified by parents and by students and teachers. So to wrap up all of the information that I've shared, based on all the research, I argue that in order to increase that parent participation and involvement in the IEP transition planning process, special education teachers must increase parent communication, provide educational materials, and make accommodations specific to each family. That leads me to my research questions. It makes me wonder, how does an increase in transition planning educational materials affect parent participation in transition planning? It makes me wonder, how does a parent support intervention affect parent perception of the IEP transition process? And it also then leads me to wonder, what is the effect of increased parent participation in the transition planning process on student outcomes? Here is a list of my resources. I am looking forward to uncovering additional research regarding my topic and putting my research questions into action within my classroom. Thank you.